Labour have U-turned on their winter fuel allowance cut as predicted, but of course, who's taking all the credit? Not Kemi Badenoch, but Nigel Farage.
We'll be finding out what the Reform leader has to say about Zia Yusuf's tantrum when he resigned as chairman, and what he says in answer to a question about whether he has a messiah complex.
I am loyal to people all the while they're loyal to me. If they're not, then things change. Inevitably what you get are people who think they're bigger and better than me.
How surprised were you, Gordon Rayner, to hear the Chancellor Rachel Reeves this morning saying, hang on a moment, we may have got the cut to the winter fuel allowance wrong?
What's the least surprised that you can possibly be by something? Because that's
turning up in the desert and finding sand.
Exactly. That's how surprised I was.
And they've announced, so we had thought, is it going to be completely reversed? It's not quite that, is it? But basically, Labour has announced that all pensioners earning less than 35 grand will have their payments, which are between £200 and £300, restored. And this is a reaction to the incredulity that the policy was met with after it was revealed that pensioners who were earning just 13 grand were losing this allowance. Because it was intended, wasn't it, as a kind of an attack on boomers, Gordon, wasn't it?
I mean, it felt from the very beginning that Labour had just sort of fallen into this massive elephant trap that the civil service had set for them, because if we go back to, when Labour first came into power, they were looking to save money. We know that every new government is told by the Treasury, by civil servants, here's lots of things you could do to save money. One of the ones they're always told is, you could get rid of the winter fuel payment.
Yes.
And they always go, don't think so, because politically that's going to be enormously damaging.
Get rid of the triple lock.
Exactly.
It's really expensive.
But Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer fell into the trap. They kind of decided it over a weekend, didn't they?
Yeah.
They just sort of had a quick meeting. Yeah, we'll do that. Didn't think about it. No doubt the Treasury mandarins went off and had a good laugh. And then they announced it, and everybody said, this is a total disaster. You're going to lose a huge amount of support. People are going to die over the winter because they'll get hypothermia. It'll all be blamed on you. And guess what? That's exactly what happened.
That's what happened. And it was so extraordinary for Labour to announce it. So then we had Labour MPs criticising their own government and making claims about pensioners choosing between heating and eating. So now that this is being restored, 9 million pensioners will continue to get the winter fuel allowance this winter. That's 75% of the elderly population of the UK. It's going to cost £1.25 billion, though, Gordon. So that needs to be paid for in the autumn budget. Let's expect more tax rises. Spending review on Wednesday. I don't know about you, but it's all feeling a little expensive for the taxpayer.
Well, maybe they'll just tax pensions and then, people's pensions, then get the money back that way.
Well, we have done a lot of coverage on the Telegraph website about that today, so do read those pieces. Shall we hear Rachel Reeves being grilled about this by Sky News' Sam Coates?
Yes, please.
Had to make urgent decisions last year to put the public finances back on a firm footing. We inherited a £22 billion in-year black hole in the public finances. I was always clear that the number one priority of this government was to return stability to the economy. We did that with a number of difficult decisions, but because of those decisions, our public finances are now in a better position, which means that this year we're able to pay the winter fuel payment to more pensioners, so 9 million will receive it this year.
Hold on a minute. Is she trying to say that the public finances have been restored because they withheld winter fuel payments from pensioners?
Yes. Basically, we had to do this because of the evil Tories. There was a £22 billion black hole in the finances. But thanks to my hugely successful autumn budget, we're now in such clover that we have enough money to give. I mean, I appreciate that Q1's growth figure was a surprising 0.7%. But hang on a minute, Rachel, from accounts. I'm not quite sure that the growth figures for the second quarter are going to be great after so-called awful April. This is some extraordinary political spinning, isn't it, Gordon?
I mean, they've done this because they are running scared of reform, haven't they?
Yes.
They haven't done it because she's woken up and had a moment of epiphany, or indeed because the public finances are brilliant now, which I didn't realise they were.
With more fiscal headroom.
Yeah. So that's what it's about, isn't it? They're terrified of reform. And obviously the Tories have said that they should restore winter fuel as well, but they don't really see the Tories as a threat anymore. I don't think they're just worried about reform taking huge chunks out of their support, aren't they?
So the plan is, right, to announce this at noon and kibosh Nigel Farage taking to the stage in Port Talbot. Labour have been in power there for 26 years. Reform has set their sights on Wales, and actually when we look ahead to the Senedd elections, must say Senedd rather than Senedd.
Or indeed Senedd, which I think is what you just said.
Shall I say it again?
Well, no, I think we can keep that in.
Yeah, keep it in. And by the way, my grandmother was from Wales, so I should know better. So he takes to the stage. He's the new representative of the working classes in Wales. And of course, he crows. Again, Labour make this mistake. They think, yeah, we're going to put it out at noon. That's going to kibosh Nigel Farage. No, he just waits for 15 minutes, stands up on stage and says, the only reason why Labour is U-turning on this is because of me. Let's have a listen.
It is a considerable step in the right direction. There'll be a lot of pensioners out there very, very pleased, including constituents of mine in Clacton who served this country in World War II and felt they were being very badly treated. So look, I think we can claim some credit for this Express headline from last week. And well done, the Express, for splashing it. And I think we have made the political weather on this one. There is no doubt in my mind that the government would not have U-turned on this had it not been for the pressure that Reform UK is putting on them.
The reason that he's in Wales, of course, is that these Senedd elections are happening next year. Reform are currently on 25% in the polling in Wales. Plaid Cymru, 30%. Labour, who, let's just remind ourselves, are in power there, are on 18%, way back in third. And Farage basically saying that Labour's been in power for 26 years. They've got nowhere to hide, he says. And he rolled off a string of statistics about what a terrible situation Wales is in. He talked about the lowest GCSE results in the UK, unemployment being the highest in the UK. GDP per capita is £10,000 less in Wales than the rest of the UK, he says. He said that the NHS in Wales has the worst cancer care in Europe. He said Wales lags behind in everything.
Even when it comes to how fast they can drive their cars.
That's right.
20 mile an hour speed limits, which we endure in London and really don't enjoy.
No.
Now, when it comes to reindustrialisation, this is very much the Trumpian playbook, isn't it? This is J.D. Vance. Look at what we've done with Rust Belt America, although actually they haven't done anything yet. But this is what we're promising the working people of the US. He's translating that politics to the UK. I mean, he doesn't single out Thatcher for criticism, closing down the mines and not putting anything in its place. But basically, he wants to make Britain great again, doesn't he, Gordon? But often this is the case. This is the problem with reform, when rhetoric meets reality, because the Telegraph's very own Tony Diver, associate political editor, asks him, I think, a really important question when it comes to refiring up the coal blast furnaces.
I'm just going to ask you one more time about this coal policy. Could you just be specific about what exactly it is you're proposing? You're talking about small specialist mines. Where would they be? Are you talking about just mines in Wales, or would you be looking to do this in England as well, if you had the opportunity? And can we just be clear that the government in Westminster has banned licences for new coal mines? So if you were to win next year, there'd be no prospects of any new mines until at least well after the next general election.
We can always have a fight, can't we? We can always have a fight. And who knows, there may be situations where we just do things. I mean, we'll have to come to that, cross that bridge. Look, I mean, for example, the coal that would have suited beautifully for Scunthorpe could be produced in Cumbria. And yet we were importing it from Japan, I think it was, to keep those blast furnaces open right at the last minute. There are still uses for coal. They are not the mass usages that we used to have years ago, but there are still usages. And if that's the case, we should produce our own.
I guess this is the problem, isn't it? That he is in danger of writing cheques that he can't cash,
yes.
I think. I was interested in another one of the answers he gave when one of the reporters got into quite a lot of detail about blast furnaces. And just to remind people, Port Talbot was the largest steelmaking plant in the UK. Then in September last year, the two blast furnaces were switched off. 2,800 jobs were lost. And the reason that he's linking coal with that is that there is Welsh coal that is very high quality, that is needed for high quality steel making. Now, he was asked, is it possible to effectively fire up those blast furnaces again, because they have an awful lot of material in them, which make anyway. The technical aspect of that is incredibly hard. A lot of the experts say you just can't do it, and his answer to that was, well, nothing's impossible. Well, it may be that is impossible, and so then he had to say, well, okay, maybe we'll just build new blast furnaces. It did feel a little bit like he was just winging it on some of that stuff,
Also, he's going to be in danger if they do get into power and he can't deliver on these promises to the working classes. It's going to be the letdown of the Tories times 100, right? Because like sometimes people look at the Tories and they make promises about jobs and working people, and people are like, well, they're not really, they're the party of the elite. He's absolutely positioning himself in this kind of man of the people space. I'm the one that can rescue Britain. And if the economic reality is that it simply isn't financially viable to reindustrialise the UK, we've now become a services economy, the factories have been closed, these towns have been left behind. I don't like this speak, by the way. I don't like this talk of declinism, and that I think it's one of the failures of Thatcherism, and I speak, as you know, as a massive Maggie fan, that nothing was put in place of the mines when they were closed down, and that some towns in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland just literally were lost because everybody in those towns lost their jobs on the back of the failure of that industry to thrive. So, of course, it's problematic. But, I mean, he's got a huge weight on his shoulders to try and fulfil some of these promises if he actually does get into number 10.
Yeah, he talked a lot about having to attract private investment to be able to do these things. He admitted that the Welsh government wouldn't be able to afford to, for example, build new blast furnaces in Port Talbot. They would have to have some money from national government, and they would have to attract some private investment. And that's a big if. I mean, he doesn't know that that's going to happen.
And this question about seriousness, the seriousness or not of reform, has been a major theme of the weekend. You and I are in and out of this studio. Oh, everything's going well for reform. They're on track to come second in the Hamilton by-election in Scotland. Oh no, Zia Yusuf has just thrown his toys out of the pram. We discussed it on Friday with Tim Montgomery. I said that I thought his departure tweet was petty and petulant. He basically says, helping reform to form the next government isn't a good use of my time. That came after the burqa ban row with Sarah Pochin, Reform MP for Runcorn, newly elected, suggesting it was an idea that the Prime Minister should consider at Prime Minister's questions. Yusuf, being a Muslim, doesn't think that's the direction of travel that the party should take. Also, there's a lack of consultation clearly within the party. Nobody knows she's going to ask this question. Everyone in Reform's heads start exploding. The party seems to implode over the weekend, and then Saturday night, there's another ex-post from Yusuf.
Yeah.
Mea culpa. I may have reacted in haste. I've been under a lot of pressure. I've worked hard without a day off for the last 11 months. And actually, I may have spoken too soon, and I'd like to come back into the fold, presumably after a warm and cuddly chat with Uncle Nigel.
Why did you quit then? Let's hear it in your own words, not just on Twitter.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for that introduction. There's a couple of characterizations there that I might want to correct, but we'll come to that. Look, over the last 11 months, incredibly proud of what we've all built together at Reform. Nigel came back as leader before the general election, after, if you remember, originally saying that he wasn't going to. He was inundated with people asking him to reconsider. And we're obviously incredibly grateful that he did. And I think that decision has changed the course of history in this country. I became chairman in July last year. Since then, we've gone from about 14% support in the country to north of 30%. We've built 400 branches from scratch. We've quadrupled the membership to 235,000. And today, even though we currently have 5 MPs in the House of Commons...
Sure, Mr. Yusuf, you're telling us why the Reform UK is a great success. You quit. You quit last week. You told us that you didn't want to get into government anymore. I'm asking you a simple question. Why did you quit?
Exhaustion. So I was about to come to that, which is, look, I've been working pretty much non-stop, virtually no days off in those 11 months. And, I built a tech company from scratch as well. And so I know what it's like. You start with almost nothing, no infrastructure at all. And this thing had just become so huge. And even, you probably remember the count at Runcorn. I was there right up until the end of that count where we obviously won by 6 votes. And even after that, I didn't really get a break because we had the celebratory event in Kent and then straight on to launching 10 councils. So
let's get to the substance, because
it was a very difficult. It's very difficult to keep going at that pace, and that exhaustion led to a poor decision.
And this was Nigel Farage's version of events.
Yes, we did hit a speed bump last week. It could be we were driving more than the recommended 20 miles an hour, which is what we're supposed to do here in Wales. But Zia Yusuf and I have worked together almost inseparably over the course of the last 11 months, and we have both taken on our shoulders the most enormous burden. Zia, administratively, far more than me. And I was already beginning the process of trying to broaden the management team. Zia lost his rag. He put out an intemperate comment or two. I wonder who in this room hasn't at some point done that, whether it's on social media or with family or friends. But it was pretty clear by the next morning that he bitterly regretted what he'd done. And as part of broadening that management team, he is very much back and enthused, and he will take on the Doge job.
And then in the same press conference, he was also asked about how a lot of people end up falling out with him, or have done over the years, and this idea that it's a sort of my way or the highway. I think he's been accused of a messiah complex almost.
Yeah, that's what Rupert Lowe said.
Fairly or unfairly. This is what he said about that.
If ever anybody talks behind my back, or if anybody betrays that trust, then I'll never speak to them again. It's quite simple, and they should expect the same level of trust back from me. And when it comes to fallouts in politics, just have a look at the chaos of the Conservatives over the last few years. So look, I am loyal to people all the while they're loyal to me. If they're not, then things change. Inevitably what you get are people who think they're bigger and better than me. The parties will be better off run by somebody else than me. And that's what leads to the public fallouts, because they don't like the result of it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think there is a problem with it being a one-man band. And we were discussing last week, what happens to reform if something happens to Nigel? And then you have this impression that it kind of ceases to exist. I don't think we can underestimate how important his role at the helm of reform is. Where is Rupert Lowe now? He has gone from Rupert to Hoopert. Maybe he will have his own kind of renaissance, I don't know. But the Zia Yusuf row, I don't think really harms reform in terms of it being a Westminster bubble story. Do you know what?
Not now it's been sorted out.
No, exactly.
I think it would have harmed them if it had come to the next general election, and the Tories and Labour could have had these posters quoting his tweet, effectively saying they're not fit to govern. But they've sorted it. I think it's killed it off. So.
And also, people quite like people admitting that they've made a mistake, saying I'm sorry and coming back. I'm just going to reflect a reader on that. Michael Connor said, how enormously refreshing to see a true British politician like Zia Yusuf publicly state he was probably wrong, has had time to think, and is now back with redoubled commitment. No PR spin, no obfuscation, no lies, just a straightforward acknowledgement that I got it wrong. I agree with Michael on that. Where it has been harmful, I think, Gordon, is it's sort of exposed in this row about banning burqas reform's internal dilemma with just how right-wing they should be. You've got somebody like Rupert Lowe having been defenestrated from the party because he was deemed to be a bit too extreme, entertaining the idea of alliances with Tommy Robinson, talking about deportations, openly saying, I'd support a burqa ban. That clearly makes somebody like Yusuf feel uncomfortable. I then question Richard Tice, the deputy reform leader, on my show on Sunday on GB News. And I'm trying to pin him down. Well, where are you on it? Do you want to ban it or not? Yes or no, I kept on saying to him. And he's in this kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We've picked off as many righties as we can, so we now need to seem more moderate. this is like all about Farage's quest to be Waitrose man. We can't go off the reservation too much. So he does this rather Kemi Badenoch style. He gives me this response where he's like, we need to have a conversation. And I'm like, come on, Richard, you know where you stand on it. And he's basically saying, well, I got him to the point of saying, deep down, yes, I do agree with the ban, but if anyone can persuade me, be my guest. It's like, get off the fence on these issues.
Yeah.
5 years ago, they would have said, ban the burqa.
Yeah, because they're now in a position where they're trying to appeal to Labour voters, aren't they? And so they that's why they're having to sort of do a bit of a pivot. I do think there was something else that was really interesting that happened in the Farage press conference that we should highlight. And it may be that it gets completely sort of overshadowed by the whole row over Zia Yusuf, which will probably get the headlines. But he introduced a couple of councillors who had defected to Reform. They were both independent councillors from Merthyr Tydfil. And they both spoke. And one of them, a chap called David Hughes, he had worked in social services, and he'd also had spent some time in the building trade. And we were talking last week, weren't we, to
Jamie Maguire.
Jamie Maguire, thank you, who had defected from Labour to Reform, and he just kept talking about all the waste that he was seeing.
Yes.
And this is a constant theme that everyone in this country is convinced that councils, and indeed governments, but certainly councils, just spaff away public money because it's somebody else's money. They don't really care how much something costs because it's not their money. And David Hughes came up with an extraordinary anecdote that I think, people will probably remember if they heard it, and will be quoting for many years to come. He said that when he was in the building trade, he had tendered for a job, and he decided to tender for £50,000, thinking, actually, that's quite a lot. I'll make a good fat profit on that. He kind of was saying that he thought that was maybe a little bit cheeky, asking that much for it. Nothing happened. He never heard anything back. And then when he became a councillor, he said to the person who was in charge of, that tendering process, whatever happened to that? And they said, oh, well, the trouble was that you were 4 times under the next lowest bidder, i.e. the next lowest bidder bid £200,000 for that contract. So they thought he wasn't serious. They thought he couldn't do the job because he was asking too little. So rather than him doing it for £50,000, which would have been, a profitable job for him, they've given it to somebody who's charged more than £200,000 because they've looked at it and thought, they must be proper builders, and he's not a proper builder.
And then these so-called proper builders end up being given every other job, and they must be thinking to themselves, oh, well, we've quoted high and we've been accepted.
Yep.
Let's just continue.
Yep.
We had the same kind of rhetoric, didn't we, from Lyndon Kemcaran, who is the new leader of Kent County Council for Reform. She's looking through all of the budgets and thinking that some of the deals they've got on repairing potholes aren't worth the paper they're written on. They're being charged far too much.
And Farage referenced Kent in his speech as well, but I don't think any of the examples that she gave us were as stark as that one, and particularly given that you've got someone who has been on both sides of the tendering process. And he'd also, from his time in children's services, he talked about how people will literally charge anything they want to look after children if the council has got themselves in a hole. He was talking about people being paid £13,000 a week to look after a child, and he'd had an argument with
£13,000 a week.
£13,000 a week. That's what he said. And he said that he'd spoken to the person who was in charge of children's services, and he'd said to them, how can you possibly justify spending that amount of money? And they said, well, you can't put a price on the well-being of a child. And he said to them, well, yeah, but you can't look after kids if you're bankrupt, and that's where we're going to be. So
Insane.
Yeah.